Hi there, this is Frugal Green Girl here again. I want to talk to you today about seedling care. One thing I forgot to mention in my last video about when you first start to plant your seedlings is plant markers. You'll want to make sure to use these if you're planting more than just a few varieties of things, because oftentimes, you know, in a tray, you know, oh, this stuff is planted on this side and that stuff is on the other side. If you move it around, sometimes it can get confusing as to which side was which, and it can get hard to remember. Or if you're planting, say, tomatoes, but you're planting 2 or 3 varieties of tomatoes, you can kind of, I struggle at least to remember which ones were which and whatnot. So it is important to use plant markers. There are 2 main kinds that you can use. Wooden sticks, which are really easy to use, available at any craft center or whatever. You just write on them and stick them in there. They do tend to mold below the soil line if you keep them in there too long, but I only use them until I'm going to put them in my garden, just to make sure that the stuff that I've started gets put in the garden in the right places. The other option would be plastic plant markers, which are a lot more expensive, and they're kind of hard to write on, so those aren't my favorite choice, but they don't mold, so I'm sure those are good for some people. Another thing to consider when you are having your seedlings start to sprout is how to water them. There are 2 main ways to water your seedlings. The first would be top watering, just taking a watering can and pouring the water on the tops of the seedlings, or the soil before they've even sprouted. This is a good option, but sometimes, if you're not careful, it'll cause the seedlings to bend over, and that can do damage to the seedlings themselves. You need to be really careful when you top water that you don't accidentally damage them. The other way would be bottom water, which is basically you pour the water into the tray below, and then the water wicks up to the plants or the seeds from the bottom. Again, they both have their benefits and their downfalls. If you water from the bottom, you won't do damage to the plants, in that they won't accidentally, you know, fall over and then not live. But if you bottom water, sometimes if you have seeds that are planted really close to the top, like those that call for only barely cover, they tend to not sprout at all because the water can't get all the way up to them. Another downfall would be that if you bottom water, oftentimes the soil gets so waterlogged that the plants actually end up with root rot. So if you do bottom water, make sure it's not too frequent that you do so, and that they have a chance to sort of dry out a little in between, and that it's not tons of water every time, all the time, sitting in there, because even the roots need oxygen and they need air. So a really surefire way to be able to water them is with a squirt bottle. If you have like a squirter and you set it to mist and you squirt them when they're really small, there's no chance of doing any damage to them falling over, and they don't get too much water or too little. It's a little bit tedious, but it's worth it if you don't want to accidentally damage the seedlings. So whichever way you choose. I know that there are people on both sides that swear by the bottom water method and those that swear by the top water method. I personally prefer the top water method, but you know, feel free to try either way and see which works best for you and in your area. Another thing to consider is seedling thinning. When the seedlings start to sprout, oftentimes if you put more than 1 seed in each cell, more than 1 seed will sprout. Well, if you let them grow together like this, not only will they be competing for the oxygen, but the sunlight and the water, but they oftentimes won't grow as well that way. What they really need to be in their own cells by themselves. So there are 2 main ways that you can thin out your seedlings. The first one is if you get it to them when they're young like this, when their 2 new true leaves just start to come out. These are their first leaves that they had come out, and they're kind of generic. The second leaves look more like what they're going to look like when they're mature. When you first start to see those leaves come out, this is the stage when you want to thin them. If you just take the seedling that you don't want, whichever one is the smaller one, or which one isn't in the middle, or whatever it is, you just kind of hold the soil down and you pull the seedling up. And as you can see, the roots aren't very big. If you were to wait until they got much larger, and it has a more complex root system, you can actually hurt the plant that you want to leave there. So a safer way to do it then would be just with some scissors. Just clip it off, the one that you don't want, basically right at the soil line. But it is important to thin your seedlings. I know it seems sad to choose one to live and one to die, but it really does need done. Otherwise, you know, they really won't grow as well, and you won't get as much out of them in the long run. I know that sounds like a lot of information, but if you do it right, then you'll get really good results. So, and after all, that is what we're really gardening for anyway, isn't it? I really hate trial and error. I want trial and success, and so if you give plants what they want, and they're nice and happy, you'll end up with some seedlings and some garden starts that you have done yourself that are just as quality as the expensive ones that you can buy at the garden centers. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you would like some more information on how to start the seeds themselves, please check out my other video on that, and thank you for watching.